Welcome to Karma Chronicles. Please like the video and subscribe. Let's begin. Growing up in the back rooms of my mother's five-star restaurant felt like living in a world of polished knives and pristine white walls. The kitchen was both claustrophobic and vast, an orchestra of steel and sizzling heat, where I often found myself lost between the counters, surrounded by the buzz of orders and the scalding smell of garlic. At 6, my hands reeked of garlic and steel polish, but that was never enough for my mother. Her voice, sharp as the knives that lined her counters, would cut through the noise of the kitchen, criticizing me for handling things like a prep cook. The family's reputation was built on a picture-perfect image, not sweat or real work. So she drilled me on etiquette, how to sit, how to stand, how to speak. She wanted grace, not grit. My sister Lily always wore the crown. She was the future face of the brand, while I was just a shadow in the kitchen, scrubbing counters and peeling potatoes. I remember trying on a discarded chef's coat one afternoon just to see how it felt, the weight of it, the promise of it. My mother stormed in, yanked it off me like I'd done something obscene, and snapped, "This isn't for you. Get back to your piano lessons." I felt the spark then, the one that said, "No, this isn't how it's going to be." But I didn't say anything. I never did. Instead, I watched. I watched the staff, learned their techniques, their stories. I snuck into the back of the kitchen, taking notes, memorizing recipes when no one was looking. If I couldn't wear the coat, at least I could wear the knowledge. The night of Lily's graduation dinner felt like a show, one I wasn't meant to be part of. She had just graduated from the best finishing school for pastry chefs in the country. Her hands were delicate, her nails polished, and she was practically glowing under the spotlights. I sat at the far end of the table, watching her take the center of everything. Our mother's pride, our father's soft approval, the whole family pretending this was normal. "Eleanor," my mother said sharply, interrupting my thoughts. "You're gripping that glass like it's a spatula." She looked at me like I was a stray dog that had wandered in from the alley. I pulled my hand back, fingers tight around my glass, feeling the calluses I'd built up over the years. My mother's voice cut through the hum of the room again. "You should learn from Lily's elegance," she said. "She knows how to present herself." I opened my mouth, wanting to defend myself, but the words stuck in my throat. I looked down at my hands, rough from years of scrubbing, chopping, and working through the heat of the kitchen. My nails were chipped and worn, like they'd been filed down by too many plates and too many hours of work no one cared to notice. I clenched my fists under the table, trying to hold back the anger bubbling up in my chest. My sister, ever the diplomatic one, gave me a tight smile and said nothing. Her eyes flicked nervously to our mother, then back at me. I knew she felt the weight of it, too. She just didn't know how to carry it. That night, after the last course was served and the laughter at the table had turned into empty chatter, I retreated to my room, shut the door behind me, and took a deep breath. My mother's words still echoed in my head. "Learn from Lily's elegance." And then something inside me snapped. I picked up my phone and typed out an application to a culinary boot camp across the state. It was a small, grungy program. Nothing fancy, but it was real. No polished knives, no pristine uniforms. Just heat, sweat, and the kind of grit I was used to. I didn't tell anyone, not even my sister, not until I had been accepted. The day I received the acceptance letter, I barely felt anything. It was just the first step. The next few months were spent under the radar, sneaking around to buy secondhand textbooks and scouring YouTube for tutorials. I started practicing in the garage, my makeshift kitchen set up under dim light, the smell of old oil lingering in the air. My knives weren't high-end, but they cut. I hacked through onions, letting the sting of their fumes burn my eyes until I couldn't tell the difference between the tears and the sweat. I trained in silence, chopping until my knuckles blistered, until the soreness in my arms felt like a constant ache. But that was good. That was what it took. The more I did it, the less I could stop. I memorized the angles of the cuts, the pressure needed, the exact time to turn the heat. Every time I made a mistake, I fixed it. Every time I sliced into my finger, I wiped away the blood, took a breath, and kept going. I didn't need anyone's approval. I didn't need my mother to see me. I needed something real, something I could hold on to. And that kitchen in the back of my house wasn't real. This was something I could build. I just had to get out, and I would. The first week of boot camp hit me harder than I expected. The kitchen at the Chicago Culinary Institute wasn't glamorous. The floors were sticky, the air thick with smoke and the smell of burnt garlic. It felt like I'd walked straight into the heart of a storm, the heat of it all nearly suffocating. But I'd signed up for this. I wanted it. I remember the bechamel sauce. It was my first real test. I'd watched the instructor's hands, the way he moved so easily, so confidently. I tried to mimic him, but I wasn't fast enough. The sauce burned before I had even realized. I could feel my face heat up with embarrassment as I scraped it into the trash. Too slow for service, the instructor barked, not looking up from his station. I wanted to snap back, but I knew better. The kitchen wasn't the place for that. I bit down on my tongue and moved on. By the end of the week, my hands were a mess of burns, blisters, and knife cuts. Every inch of my skin felt raw. My back ached from hours of standing, my legs stiff from running from station to station. I couldn't remember the last time I had time to sit down for more than a few seconds. There were days when I felt like I'd reached my limit, like I'd break under the pressure, but I didn't. Not yet. I started to notice the others in the class. There was Mike, the army cook with hands like slabs of concrete, who never flinched, even when the orders came in faster than he could process them. Then there was Jess, a single dad with a worn face and soft eyes who worked twice as hard as anyone else, probably because he had a little girl back home depending on him, and Emily, the quiet girl who had worked in a diner for years. She was a sponge, soaking up everything, always asking questions. I could see their stories in the way they moved, the way they cooked. We didn't talk about it much, but we all knew the pressure of being here. For some of us, it was a second chance. For others, it was a way out. For me, it was the only thing that mattered. One night, during a brutal dinner rush simulation, things fell apart. The kitchen exploded with noise. Orders piled up. The heat was unbearable. I could feel the sweat dripping down my back, my hands moving mechanically, trying to keep up. My heart was hammering in my chest. I had never been so close to losing control. And then it happened. Mike, who'd been working the grill, suddenly staggered, swayed, and collapsed onto the floor. The whole kitchen froze. Jess was the first to rush to his side. He rolled him over, checking for a pulse, but Mike was out cold. There was a moment of complete chaos. Everyone yelled for help, but it didn't matter. I wasn't going to wait for anyone else. I dropped what I was holding, ignoring the orders stacking up around me. I leaned over Mike, checked for any signs of life, and gave him a quick tap on the cheek. "Mike!" I shouted. "Come on, get up!" It was like something snapped in him. He blinked, groaned, and slowly lifted his head. I pulled him to his feet, ignoring the way my own legs felt like jelly. He was disoriented, but he wasn't dead. We got him out of the line of fire, and I kept him talking, making sure he didn't pass out again. The instructor watched all of this in silence. When Mike was clear of the danger, he nodded toward me. "You didn't fold," he said, his voice low. "That's a chef's instinct. Get back to your station." It wasn't much, but it was the first real praise I'd received in this hellhole. I didn't say anything back. I just nodded and got back to work. Because in that moment, I realized something. I could handle this. I wasn't folding, no matter what the kitchen threw at me. I was ready for it. And nothing, not my past, not my mother's voice, not the pressure, was going to make me walk away. By the time the night ended, I was covered in grease, sweat, and the kind of exhaustion that makes your bones ache. But I was still standing. That was something, right? I wasn't a prep cook anymore. I was on my way to something more. The midterm results were posted just as the buzz in the kitchen reached a crescendo. All those weeks of practice, the cuts, the burns, the sweat, everything piling up to this moment. I had aced most of it, but the one recipe I'd struggled with, the bechamel sauce I'd burned that first week, still haunted me. I'd gotten it right this time, but I'd made a small mistake on another dish. Just one. A seasoning misstep that, in a kitchen like this, cost me everything. I ranked third in the entire cohort. Third. That night, I called my mother. I don't know why I still did it. The phone rang and rang. I stood there in the hall, gripping the phone like it might shatter in my hand, waiting for the click of her voicemail. "Mom, it's Eleanor," I said, my voice steady, even though my chest tightened. "I just thought you'd want to know I'm doing something that matters to me." I waited, hoping maybe this time, just this once, she'd pick up. But the voicemail beeped before I could finish. "I'll talk to you later," I muttered, swallowing the lump in my throat. I'm doing well, really well. Talk to you soon." I didn't expect a reply. I never did. But I still needed it, somehow. I didn't let the hurt sit with me for too long. I couldn't. The kitchen didn't allow for lingering emotions, not when service was around the corner, not when the knives were waiting. I tried to move on, focused on the next thing, the next challenge. But her voice kept coming back. No real chef has dirt under her nails. The words echoed in my head like a drumbeat, like she was still standing behind me, breathing down my neck. I let the tension slide off me as best I could, but it stung. It always did. The next day, the class gathered in the dining room for the announcement of rankings. The instructor's voice cracked the air like a whip, his words bouncing off the high walls of the institute. The numbers, the marks, the feedback. It was all so familiar by now. The ritual of measuring, of comparing. When they called my name, third place, I stood up, my legs stiff, feeling the weight of the room's eyes. My classmates erupted into applause, but it was a distant sound. I could hear them cheering, but I couldn't feel it. I smiled because I had to, because that was what was expected. But deep down, there was no pride in it, not the way I thought there would be. The applause faded into a dull hum in the background as I stood there, just a body in a sea of applause. The smile stretched across my face like a mask I'd learned to wear. But it didn't change the fact that the one person who measured my worth, the one person I'd always wanted to see me, she wasn't there. She never would be. My classmates crowded around me, clapping me on the back. But I wasn't really there. The cheers felt like they were meant for someone else, someone whose name wasn't Eleanor. Maybe it was Lily's name they were chanting in my place. After all, she was the one who'd never needed to work for approval. She had always been what our mother wanted. Polished, poised, effortless. I knew I should have felt something. Pride, relief, maybe even joy. But all I felt was an empty space. Third place was good, but it wasn't enough. I wanted to turn around and call my mother. I wanted to hear her tell me I'd done well, that she was proud. I wanted to hear her say anything that made this win feel like it mattered. But I knew that wasn't going to happen. Not this time. Not ever. Instead, I stood there, my smile frozen, and let the moment pass. I walked into the ballroom in my chef's jacket, feeling like a mismatched puzzle piece, but I couldn't make myself take it off. The gown-clad crowd parted like the Red Sea when I entered, their glances sharp, quick, and all too obvious. I caught the smell of perfume and champagne hanging in the air, thick and overpowering, while the soft clink of silverware on plates buzzed around me. My mother was the first to notice. Her eyes narrowed when she saw me, the weight of her disapproval like a shadow creeping over her face. "Eleanor," she said stiffly, glancing at my jacket, her voice tight, "couldn't you have worn something a little more polished?" I swallowed down the sting. "This is polished," I muttered, but she was already walking away, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. She never liked my uniform. It was a constant reminder of everything she didn't want me to be. Lily stepped toward me, her eyes softening when she saw me standing there. She pulled me into a hug, her arms hesitant at first, but then warm. "I'm so glad you could make it," she said, her voice almost too sweet, like she was trying to convince herself of that. She pulled back quickly, glancing over her shoulder at our mother, her smile stiff. "I wouldn't miss it," I told her, and for a moment we stood there, in this weird space between us. She didn't say anything more, but I could feel the nerves radiating off her. The tension between us was almost tangible. She didn't want me here, not like this. The speeches began shortly after that, a long string of glowing tributes to Lily's natural refinement and unstoppable leadership. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream. She didn't need to be here. She already had everything. I found my seat at the far edge of the ballroom, far enough away that I could escape the noise if I needed to. My plate sat untouched in front of me, the food lukewarm, a bland mix of things I didn't care about. I had no appetite, not for this. The family name was everywhere, stamped across the walls, on the awards, in every congratulatory speech. The family name, like it was something worth worshiping. I sat there, isolated in a sea of perfect people, and the emptiness started to crawl into my chest. My fingers gripped the edge of my plate until my knuckles turned white. I could hear my mother's voice in the back of my mind. "No real chef has dirt under her nails." I could almost hear it louder than the chatter around me. Lily's name was praised again, the same words repeated, the same accolades thrown at her like confetti. She was their golden child. She was polished and perfect, always just what they wanted. And I wasn't. I felt it then. The erasure, the way I didn't exist in this world except as a ghost in a chef's jacket. I wasn't a part of their story. I was a shadow at the edges of it. So I sat there in silence, the cheers and praises swelling around me, and tried to pretend I didn't care. But I did. I cared more than I ever let myself admit. The gala dinner was more of a spectacle than a meal. The chandeliers glittered like 1,000 tiny stars, and the crystal glasses caught the light just right, making everything look polished, staged. My mother sat at the head of the table, her posture perfect, her smile rehearsed. She made sure to position herself between the key industry chefs, the ones who mattered, the ones she had cultivated for years. I sat across from her, barely noticed, my hand resting on the edge of my plate, still untouched. The hum of conversation buzzed around me, too smooth, too polished, too fake. And then, as if it couldn't have been more obvious, my mother raised her glass for a toast. "To my daughter, Lily," she said, her voice lifting, "who's carried on the refined legacy of this family, and who will continue to do so with grace and elegance, not just running kitchens like a brute, but truly leading with poise." There it was, the jab, the shot directly aimed at me, even though she didn't say my name. Everyone laughed, the sound like a chorus of approval. My mother's eyes never met mine, but I knew exactly what she meant. The heat in my chest flared up, a slow burn that crept up my neck. My grip on the glass tightened, but I didn't say a word. I kept my face neutral, trying to breathe through it, trying to keep the anger from slipping out of my mouth. It was one thing when it was just us at home, but here, surrounded by the people she cared about, the people she needed to impress, it was different. Lily, sitting next to me, reached under the table and squeezed my hand. Her fingers trembled for a second before she pulled away. She didn't say anything, didn't apologize, didn't explain. She just sat there, and I sat there, caught between the love and the distance we both knew was there. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating, and I knew I couldn't sit here much longer. The industry chefs kept talking, laughing, all pretending like they hadn't heard the insult that had just been thrown my way. No one was paying attention to me anyway, but the head judge of the televised cooking competition, the one who had been watching me all night, was. I could feel his gaze on me, his eyes sharp, assessing. It made the heat in my chest grow, a burn that had nothing to do with the toast and everything to do with the expectations that I knew he was placing on me, the expectations I'd been fighting for years. I couldn't take it anymore. I pushed my chair back slowly, as casually as I could, and stood up, letting the cold air from the open door wash over me as I walked out. My heart pounded as I stepped outside, the warmth of the ballroom and its fake smiles replaced by the bitter chill of the evening. The coolness bit into my skin, but it was a relief. I could finally breathe. I leaned against the brick wall of the building, the cold sinking into my bones, letting it calm me down. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to get my pulse to steady. It was stupid. I was stupid. I should have stayed in there, played along, smiled through the rest of it. But the thought of staying in that room, listening to the praise for Lily and the thinly veiled insults aimed at me, felt like too much. Why do I even care? I thought. But I did care. I always had. No matter how much I wanted to bury that piece of me, the part that still sought her approval, the part that still wondered if I was good enough. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, the night air sharp against my skin, and stood there, letting the quiet of the city wash over me. The longer I stood there, the more I realized something. I wasn't going back in, not for that, not for her. And yet, as I stood there in the dark, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, something that would always feel empty until I finally walked away. I stood outside for what felt like hours, letting the chill of the night work its way through me, trying to quiet the fire that kept sparking in my chest. The pressure, the sting of rejection, the feeling of being erased, it had all been too much to swallow. I tried to calm my breathing, but the image of my mother's smug smile, her delicate toast, and the way Lily's eyes avoided mine wouldn't leave me. I should have stayed out there. I should have just left, gotten in a cab, and disappeared into the city, away from their polished world. But I couldn't, not yet. With a deep breath, I turned back toward the ballroom, the sound of voices and laughter creeping out through the door as it swung open. I pushed it open and stepped inside, feeling the heat of the room hit me like a wall. I was barely through the door when I felt his presence. The head judge, the one who had been watching me all night, was standing near the center of the room. He wasn't smiling, but there was something intense in his gaze, something that made me pause. He watched me for a beat, and then without a word, he walked toward me, his expression unreadable. Before I could say anything, he stood up in front of the whole room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice cutting through the murmur of conversation, "I'd like to make a toast." All eyes shifted. The laughter died. The room fell quiet as he raised his glass, the sound of crystal clinking against metal sharp in the silence. "I want to raise my glass to the unsung chefs," he continued, his eyes landing on me now, steady and sure. "The ones who fight for every place they earn. The ones who don't take shortcuts. The ones who work tirelessly, day in and day out, making sure every plate is right no matter the cost. These chefs might not always get the applause they deserve, but their work speaks louder than any award." For a moment, I thought I was imagining it, but then I saw it. The way his eyes didn't leave mine. He was talking about me. He was talking about the kitchen I came from, the one where I had learned to fight for every inch. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could feel the blood rushing to my head. I wasn't ready for this. Not here, not now. I glanced at my mother. Her face was frozen, her hand gripping her glass tightly, but her lips were pressed into a thin line. She was already thinking about how to shut this down, but the judge wasn't done. "I've had the pleasure of watching Eleanor work," he said, his voice calm but with weight behind it. "And I've seen something that others here haven't. A dedication to doing things right, not just for the spotlight, but for the integrity of the work itself." I felt my throat tighten. It was happening. This wasn't just a compliment. This wasn't just a speech. It was something else. My mother shifted in her seat, ready to cut in, to stop him, but he raised his hand, silencing her before she could even open her mouth. "What I'm about to say next is important," he continued, his eyes narrowing slightly as he turned to face the room. "I've also had the opportunity to review some information Eleanor brought to light regarding the practices in the restaurant she grew up in. Information about food safety violations and misrepresented sourcing in the flagship location, particularly in the charity brunch series that's been so heavily advertised. This isn't something I take lightly." A wave of cold washed over me, but I didn't flinch. I stood up straighter. I was already committed, and I couldn't back out now. I walked to the front, feeling every single set of eyes on me, every breath holding tight in the room. My mother's face twisted, her jaw tight, but she didn't say anything. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the report, the one I'd spent weeks compiling, the one that detailed every single violation, the food sourced from questionable suppliers, the overlooked health code breaches, the false claims that had been made under the banner of charity. I laid it on the table right in front of my mother, who looked like she had been punched in the gut. There was a brief silence before the whispers started. The room buzzed with disbelief, with shock. My mother's face was pale, her eyes wide. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. My sister's face was a mask of confusion and devastation. Her lips trembled, but she didn't speak either. She just sat there, frozen, like she was watching something she couldn't stop. I stood there, letting the weight of it all settle over the room. This was it. This was my moment. The judge took a step back, his eyes still on me. But there was a flicker of something, respect, maybe, in them. "Eleanor didn't fold," he said quietly, his voice carrying in the stillness. "She fought for what's right, even when it was the hardest thing to do." The room was silent, all eyes still on me. My mother didn't move. She didn't say a word. The rest of the guests murmured, some out of shock, others with a sense of discomfort, but I was done waiting for approval. I was done hiding. And as I stood there, with the truth finally out, I realized that for the first time, I was finally seen. Not as my mother's shadow, not as Lily's sister, but as me, Eleanor. The silence after the judge's words felt like the world had stopped moving. No one spoke. The noise of the gala had died down completely. The murmur of whispers filled the air, but it wasn't just the guests gossiping. The tension in the room felt palpable, a pressure pushing against my chest. And then, just as I thought the room couldn't hold another ounce of discomfort, the door opened. 2 health inspectors, dressed in plain clothes, walked in quietly, their presence like a shadow that fell across the entire room. They didn't need to say anything. They just stood there, watching, waiting. My mother's face drained of all color. She tried to maintain her composure, straightening her posture, but the weight of what was happening hit her in waves. She knew what this meant. even before one of the inspectors approached her. "Ma'am, we'll need to speak with you," one of them said, his tone polite but firm. It wasn't an arrest, not yet, but the way the guests watched, the way they whispered, it was clear this wasn't going away. The inspector's questions were methodical, calm, but every word seemed to dig deeper, pulling at the seams of the empire my mother had built. She answered them, but I could see the cracks forming in her mask. For the first time, I saw her as human, as vulnerable. I stood there, at the edge of it all, watching her, but not feeling the satisfaction I thought I might. The guests didn't leave immediately. They lingered, a crowd of uncertain faces caught between politeness and the realization that the night was over, that everything had changed. Their conversations were quieter now, less exuberant. A few of them came up to me, some offering words of support, others just awkwardly offering a nod, as if suddenly seeing me for the first time. I didn't take it in. I didn't want it. Lily, who had been standing near the table, didn't say anything at first. She just stared at the scene unfolding, her mouth slightly open in disbelief. It felt like a weight was pressing on her chest too. She turned to me, her face pale, and whispered, "You really did it." I didn't know what to say. I nodded, but the words didn't feel like they mattered. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel anything except relief. A sense of heaviness lifting off my shoulders. The pressure I'd lived with for so long, the constant need to prove myself, to fight for every inch, was finally gone. I didn't have to play the part anymore. I didn't need my mother's approval, and I didn't need her image anymore either. I had done what I needed to do, but it wasn't some big win. It was just done. We stood there for a moment longer, as the rest of the guests slowly started to leave, making polite excuses, stepping over the shattered image of the night. My sister didn't move away from me. She just stood there, her eyes searching mine, looking for something I couldn't give her. I turned toward the door, and she followed me. We stepped outside into the cool night air, the chill a welcome contrast to the stifling heat of the ballroom. The sound of the city was distant, but I could feel it, the hum of it, the life of it, the freedom of it. The judge was standing nearby, his hands in his pockets, watching the skyline. He nodded toward us as we approached. "You okay?" he asked, his voice quiet. I didn't say anything right away. Instead, I looked up at the city lights, the skyline cutting through the night like a jagged silhouette. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was. But for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was looking at something that could be mine, something I could claim for myself. "I'm good," I finally said, my voice steady. I wasn't looking for comfort, but his presence felt like a steadying force in the midst of everything. Lily stood beside me, her eyes still wide, her mind trying to catch up with everything that had just happened. We all stared at the skyline in silence, each of us lost in our thoughts. But I could feel a shift, a quiet reckoning in the air. Maybe it was just the calm before everything else would change. I wasn't sure what came next. But for the first time, I didn't need to figure it out right away. The night had cracked wide open, and everything felt different. A week later, the phone call came. It was the judge, his voice calm but sure, like he had already decided. "We've got a spot for you," he said. "My new kitchen. You're in. We're looking for someone to lead." It hit me like a punch to the gut. A real chance to lead, to be in charge. My heart raced as I hung up. I hadn't expected it, but I had wanted it. For so long, I had worked towards something bigger than just surviving. Something that was mine. Something that could finally feel real. I didn't have to think about it. I said yes without hesitation, without a second of doubt. The next day, Lily's note arrived. It was simple, scribbled on a piece of stationery from the gala. "I'm sorry for standing back. I'm proud of you." I stared at the words for a long time, letting them sink in. I wanted to believe them. I wanted to be grateful. But the truth was, I didn't know if I could ever forgive her for not standing beside me when it mattered most. Maybe I would, eventually, but not yet. I put the note down and left for the old restaurant. The building felt like a ghost when I walked inside. The air was still thick with memories, the clink of glasses, the sharp snap of the kitchen doors, my mother's voice echoing from the dining room. It was all gone now. The place was empty, stripped of the pride it once carried. The new owners were already there, moving in their things, as if nothing had ever been. I found a seat at the table in the back, the one I used to sit at after long shifts when I needed a moment to breathe. The hardwood floors creaked under my feet as I pulled out my chef's knife, the one I had carried through every cut, every burn, every dish that had taught me something. I placed it on the table in front of me. The weight of it was familiar, grounding. I ran my fingers over the handle, the worn wood smoothing under my touch. I looked at my reflection in the window, my face pale, tired, but sharp. Not rebellious, not a shadow of someone else. A professional, scarred, sure, but sharper than ever. I didn't get my mother's approval, not ever. But I had something better now. I had my own voice, my own kitchen, the freedom to lead, to shape my future, to cook without the shadow of someone else's expectations. I stood up and looked around the empty room one last time, the space so much quieter than I remembered. Then I locked the door behind me. As I walked away, I thought about everything that had led me here. I never got a seat at their table, but I had built my own.